There we go.
Should the recording pause to go away?
It should have, yes. I'm now recording.
All good?
All good.
Okay, then I'll call our, excuse me, Plan Commission meeting for August 10, 2020 to order. Roll call, please.
Chris Zellner,
Here.
Bill Willems,
Here.
Kristen Runge,
Here.
Brad Zeman,
Here.
Brian Wallace,
Here.
Chris Thomas,
Here.
Brian Malish.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. First item we have is on our agenda is minutes. So look for a motion for those.
Move approval of the minutes of the July 8th meeting, 13th meeting.
Motion
And I'll
by
give that a
Cool.
second.
Second by Brad Zeman. Any other comments from anybody? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, call the question. Roll call vote, Tracy. Oh, sorry, Brian Wallace, did you put your hand up? No? Okay. Okay. Tracy, go ahead.
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
Bill Willems,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Brad Zeman,
Yes.
Brian Malish,
Yes.
Chris Thomas,
Yes.
Brian Wallace.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next item we have is public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to make a comment for tonight's meeting? Please raise your hand for the attendees, if so.
I see no hands up.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on. First item under new business discussion, action on moving forward with repealing section 133.16, restrictions on rezoning for multifamily use in the village zoning code, and a related amendment to the comprehensive plan regarding the 75-25 housing ratio. Kevin?
Yes, good evening. So we broke up a couple of these agenda items. We had them lumped together at the last month, and rather caused confusion. There was some clear direction from the CDA in terms of recommendation on the changes related to the ratio. So that we thought it was important to break out those from the change of the comp plan with regard to some of the housing issues. So the CDA had recommended that we remove the ordinance that has the ratio in it. And Brian shared with us at the last meeting that we are one of no one else in Dane County that has such an ordinance with regard to the ratio. There are other communities that have some language in their comp plan. But we thought it was important, and Brian put together a memo that was, or an email that was in your packet, and really outlining, the reasons why we want to remove that from our zoning code. So what staff is recommending is that we just try and focus in on the ratio, and really it's a two-step process, and you're not approving this tonight. The only thing you'd be doing is recommending and really directing staff to move forward with the process. So that's going to have a public process. It'll include public hearings. It'll include more discussion by the Plan Commission, and then ultimately the village board. We're not trying to, you're certainly not approving this language as it's being proposed, other than this would generally follow unless you want to make changes, this is what we would be putting forward for the public process and moving forward with the changes. So with that, I thought Jason was gonna join us, but he may think this starts at 6. But Brian, do you have anything more to add?
No, I can certainly answer any questions, but I think you covered all of it, Kevin.
Okay, so then I will go. Brian, that was your room is quite, I want to say mint green tonight. Kind of on my screen, it really jumps out at me. So anyway, I don't know how everybody else felt about that, but it's like, whoa. within there. So I'm just going to go round robin here for any of you that have questions, comments in regards to this, and I'm going to start tonight with the Willems.
No comments other than it appears that our existing code is a little old-fashioned.
Okay, Chris Thomas.
I've got a few questions, mainly just wanting some clarification. So this is the 75-25 is in relation to single family detached. My first assumption with that would mean that that does not include duplexes. Are duplexes considered part of multifamily or no?
Duplexes are actually counted as single family, so count as two single family units. It's 3 units attached or more is considered multifamily.
Okay. And then you mentioned that there's no other ordinances in Dane County for this, but it sounds like it could be in other comp plans. Do we know what the ratio is in other comp plans?
Yeah, Tracy and Jason had spent some time on that, and why don't we see if we can't bring that up on the screen. Tracy, I don't know if you have that available. I think it came out of the last Plan Commission packet, maybe, or what? I know this went to the CDA.
It went to the CDA. I'll look it up. Hang on.
Great, thanks. And we'll try and track that down as part of this discussion, Chris.
Okay. So do we know what the current ratio is in Waunakee for multifamily versus single family detached?
We do. It's at about 74% single family, and then so 26% multifamily. And I know we have a slide that we can also share, but I can tell you the numbers that if you look at what's being proposed now in terms of single family and what we have proposed in terms of multifamily, that ratio would generally be the same. So if we add up, I don't know if it'll happen, but if all the multifamily that is being proposed moves forward and all the single family that's currently in the hopper moves forward, that ratio would stay about the same, 75-25. I think it would still be slightly above that 75 in terms of single family based on the current, proposals.
Okay. And has there been any feedback from developers on a ratio that they would like, or how much multifamily they've been wanting to put into some of these developments that they've been restricted to only 25%?
Yeah, so remember, ours is a little bit complicated and confusing because the way we count the multifamily is village-wide, so it's not on a per development phase. So we don't really have a good way of queuing up who would get to go first or who would go to get second. So in some developments, there's been some multifamily that's been proposed with it. But most of the developments, well, not most of them, there's certainly a number of the developments that are standalone multifamily, like the Laurel Apartments is a good example. That's involved in a commercial district, but it abuts next to single family. Generally speaking, we've seen at least the last couple of years, and I think Viridian was a really good example on how multifamily has been part of these neighborhood plans. So there's areas that I think we're going to tend to see, and we've heard it from our next big development is going to be on the west side of Highway Q. And with that development as well, the developer is proposing single family along with some multifamily. Another good example is the Arboretum Village. That had a proposal of about 75-25 in terms of what the single family to multifamily.
Okay.
Chris, a good example for that, hopefully I'm not muted. A good example is, my subdivision's Westview Meadows. We have no multifamily in the whole subdivision throughout here. So whereas others, there's going to be a higher percentage. But as Kevin's saying, I think that's a correct, assumption for us to say that that 75-25 has been village-wide versus subdivision-wide.
Okay.
I would add on a staff level, we think it's more important that we put our efforts into finding, where the multifamily is appropriate, what it looks like, and make sure it conforms with those, neighborhoods. And when we say neighborhoods, don't think of it as just like one plat. It's a neighborhood that I would consider the Kilkenny, that has commercial development, and has the clinic, and it has single family. I would consider that all part of that neighborhood, not just the single family separated out from the commercial. So I think the planners tell us to say, let's work towards neighborhoods. The neighborhood could be, that's not just Main Street. That could be all of downtown. We have some single family and some of the, the third, fourth, fifth streets. We have some multifamily, to have a nice balance between, single family and multifamily in all these neighborhoods. But when, like I said, when I say neighborhoods, we could probably break down Waunakee to having, 10 or so neighborhoods, and really grouping a number of those plats together.
Okay, my last question then is there a vision for Waunakee for how much percent would be multifamily?
When you say vision, Chris, I mean, what do you mean by that, I guess?
I mean, if right now we're at 75-25 and we're looking to get rid of that, are we hoping that eventually there's more than 25% multifamily?
Kristen, do you want to take that one from our CDA meeting?
Yeah, so we talked about there, rather than being an ordinance, that in the comprehensive plan, there would be a goal or a guideline. So do we have that number now? Probably not, but I don't see us, I do see us, I should say, providing some sort of guideline in the comprehensive plan. Whether that us is the plan commission or the CDA or a combination of the both.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Brian Wallace.
I guess I'd to start with, I would piggyback a little bit on what Chris was asking about the 75-25 rule that's currently exists. And Kristen kind of answered about the thought process of having more multifamily, but not, what's that number? What's that goal that somebody might be looking at? And to this point, and to that point, I guess I would say as well, if we have 75-25 as a goal, right now we're not at that, and that seems to be fine. I don't see that we're having any struggles with that, but why do we want to change it drastically now, or do we want to just have it open-ended with no commitment to that ratio?
So I think I see Kevin and Brian are staying quiet right now, but I think the answer to that, Brian, is we're trying to. This ordinance the ordinance is really what we're trying to take away, the 75-25 in that. Whether that means that it's going to be in the comprehensive plan or not, we're not at that phase yet. All we're looking at, correct, Brian? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, so from my perspective, for all of the reasons we've talked about, we definitely want to get rid of the ordinance. And I would say that because we kind of stick out like a sore thumb right now because we're the only one that has it. And even the ordinance itself has got a little bit of confusion that we've talked about at this meeting at the CDA as it relates to, is this village-wide, is it per development, et cetera. So I say strong recommendation that we get rid of the ordinance. Now, the discussion so far to date as part of this plan commission meeting has been, okay, if we're going to modify the comp plan, do we get rid of the ratio entirely, or do we modify the language? Do we keep a 75? I mean, to me, when it comes to the comp plan, we have a lot more flexibility on the direction that the village would want to go. Just purely as an example, if the thought process is we're okay with getting rid of the ordinance, but we want to have some type of goals and guidelines within the comprehensive plan. We have the ability to identify a ratio if we want to in the comprehensive plan. We have the ability to address, developments on a project by project basis or village wide. I mean, those are different things that we can get into. And I think that's part of the purpose for having the discussion tonight is if we are going to make changes, what changes do you want to see happen? Staff has made one recommendation. I think the recommendation on the ordinance is very strong. I think the recommendation on the comp plan is we need to change the language in the comp plan if we're going to get rid of the ordinance, because if you look at the email that I sent out, the existing language in the comp plan says maintain regulations that require new developments maintain a ratio of 75% detached single family units and 25% attached units. If we're going to get rid of the ordinance, we necessarily have to change that language. What this language is going to look like, though, is really kind of part of what our conversation is tonight. What does the Plan Commission want to see in there? Do we want to see any type of ratio or guidelines?
So on the information that Tracy had up earlier, it talks, I see like the city of Verona, the village of DeForest, there was some others listed there that have some expectation of single family to multifamily ratio. How are they putting that into their ordinance or comp plan?
Well, I can speak on Verona. Verona doesn't have an ordinance. It has a policy, though, that it requires developers to abide by. I don't know if that same language is in the comp plan. I would tend to think it probably is, but I don't know for sure. But they use essentially a policy basis to require a certain ratio for developments.
And how is that different from what we're trying to do here?
I think if the village were ultimately to come out of this with some type of ratio, I would say, but not have it in an ordinance, I say that I think what the village would be doing would be very consistent with what that particular city is doing. It looked, I mean, when Trey, I mean, and this is really kind of a discretionary decision, obviously, for the village, because I think when Tracy had put that screen up, there were certainly some communities that were like Verona, which have a ratio, and there are other communities that it does not appear have any type of ratio, and basically, for lack of a better term, allow the market to kind of govern, and also what is intelligent development.
Brian, if I could add on to what Brian Walsh, if I could add to what Brian is saying, I think from my perspective is that we need to remove this regulations that's in our comp plan. And if we change it to a goal or a policy, I think that would be more in line with what other communities are doing. There's not other communities that are regulating it like we do. And really we need, if we're going to remove the ordinance and for our ordinance to be consistent with our comprehensive plan, we need to change both. And
so have we had, sorry, Kevin, but have we had any situations over, your time here or even the last 10 years that we've had to deny or readjust because of this as it currently exists?
We do right now, because I think the way it's working is that the single family has to be completed before we can get to the, before we can add the other 25% to multifamily. And so we have more requests now in terms of multifamily, depending on the timing of when that single family got built. We wouldn't know how to regulate it in terms of who gets to go first in building their multifamily. But if we look at it holistically, if we look at all the single family that's going to be proposed and the multifamily, we're staying at about that 75-25 ratio. We just don't know, which would come first or what the timing would be. Would the multifamily come sooner or would the single family come sooner?
Are you saying, Kevin, that if we have a neighborhood development that has in the plan process, and we'll use these numbers, 75% single family and 25% multifamily, with a apartment complex or whatever it might be, that we can't build that apartment complex until the other single family is built out?
That's the way it's currently regulated, correct.
Okay, so if we adjust or modify, and maybe we maintain this as a goal, and have some language there that says that once the plat is determined, which shows what that ratio or that percentage is going to be, that anything can move forward at any point in time. Is that what we're trying to get to, or can we get to that?
Yeah, that's more, I would put that more as a regulation, because I think there's probably a number of questions that would come with trying to regulate it like that. What if you have a development that's in a commercial district that doesn't have any single family?
Well, I would assume that that's taken into account from a village-wide perspective, and then it's also coming in front of the Plan Commission for approval.
Correct.
Okay, I don't have any more questions.
Brad Zeman?
No questions.
No questions? Okay, thanks, Brad. Kristen Runge.
So one of the things that concerns me about the way that the ordinance goes is that it seems to assume that we're always going to have new single-family development that will support then the subsequent development of multifamily households. So if we had a developer we wanted to work with that came in with a greenfield project and no associated single-family home development, I don't know that the ordinance makes it clear that that's allowable, or if we would be going above and beyond, or beyond, it's being seen as favoring one developer in that situation also over another. I'd also, wonder if the way that the ordinance is written now, the only time it doesn't really apply is when we are redeveloping neighborhoods. So if we needed, let's say we don't have any new single family homes coming in, and we needed an apartment complex for some reason, we just run out of housing, we see a need in our workforce to provide 2 or 3 bedroom homes for rentals. We can't do that single family wise in a way that pencils out. Then does that prompt developers to look at our existing neighborhoods and look at redeveloping areas where neighborhoods may not want to redevelop? I mean, these are the things that I wonder, that the difference between an ordinance and a guideline, and having clear language in a comp plan as opposed to this really hard and fast rule. And I don't know what that, Jason, I see you're on the line. If you had any insight into that, or who we might be excluding by having this as an ordinance as opposed to a comp plan guideline. I'm putting you on the spot, Jason, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry I'm late. Put the wrong time on my calendar. So yeah, kind of coming in the middle of the conversation a little bit, but right now, if you happen to have zoning that allows it, and the most convenient zoning to allow it without being subject to this is the C1D, you're not beholden to this requirement, and that has pushed units downtown. And I think overall that's a good thing. So I'm going to kind of wander around for a moment here, and not sure if I'll hit on what you're asking yet or not, Kristen. But what the ordinance is doing is really pushing developers interested in developing attached units downtown or to places with existing zoning, which may or may not actually make sense for the overall development of the village. And so if we have a greenfield site that is part of an expansion zone, or if perhaps we have a redevelopment where, for example, we've been looking at the site that is west of McDonald's that is currently zoned and planned for commercial. And I think those who have been looking at that site recognize that, yeah, that'd be okay for residential, but we can't rezone it to residential, or we're limited. We may not be able to rezone it to residential because of this ordinance. And the impact of that then is that we are trying to, in talks with a developer, trying to shoehorn in a little snippet of commercial to call it acceptable under the commercial zoning, instead of just saying, no, this is appropriate for residential. Let's rezone it to residential and call it what it is, and not try to force some commercial in. So I think that's an example of how the ordinance is forcing us into conversations that would be more easily addressed by saying, if this is appropriate, let's change the comp plan and rezone it and move ahead with residential.
Any more, Kristen?
Nope, that's all.
Brian Malich?
I'm trying to digest, Jason, what you just went through there, because I think it was dancing around sort of one of the questions that I had that I don't know that I've really heard yet, but in terms of removing this, the section 133.16, when I go back through the notes as to why we would remove that, and this probably speaks a little bit to my just big picture ignorance here on how the ordinance or what the downstream impact or effect is. I guess why remove this ordinance? And I'm asking that versus like clarifying it. Because what I've seen is essentially the answer is that we're the only ones that have it, and then it's confusing. So the first one, the fact that we're the only ones that have it, I don't get that as a reason for removing it. I'm assuming there's more, and I think it's a little bit of what you just ran through, Jason, that I'm still digesting. And then the second note that I pulled out of this is that it's confusing, so why not just clarify it, and then we're fine, we'll leave it. Why change for the sake of just change something that seems to be working?
So actually, Jason, I'm gonna let Brian go because he had his hand up. Go ahead, Brian.
So I guess what I think this might get at what you're, maybe a little bit indirectly what you just said, Brian. But so like if you look at the packet that we have right now, we're suggesting, recommending that we get rid of the ordinance, and then we're recommending a change to the comp plan. But the language that we've proposed at a staff level does not have a ratio in it. And thus far during the conversation, we've had a lot of conversation about that. And I want to throw out some language as an potential alternative for the Plan Commission to contemplate, not to approve tonight, but if the idea is the Plan Commission is not necessarily comfortable getting rid of all ratios, and we do want to have some type of goal or guideline, at least in the comprehensive plan, one way to approach this would essentially be, let's get rid of the existing language that's in the 2.5, and you can replace it with what are effectively 3 bullet points. One bullet point would say, for projects that include both single family and multifamily components, the goal is approximately a mix of 66% single family attached and 33% of other forms of housing. That ratio is not hard and fast. I mean, if the Plan Commission wasn't comfortable with that, you could change it. Then there's language that says this ratio is flexible based on development review, which should emphasize the importance of building site and neighborhood design. So that bullet point would effectively be there to deal with proposed developments that are going to have both single family and multifamily components. But then we also have these projects that you guys have touched on that are maybe only multifamily in nature. And so we would have a bullet that would say, for projects containing only multifamily housing or mixed use developments, no specific village-wide housing ratio will apply. Instead, development review should emphasize the importance of building site and neighborhood design. The thought process there is we're going to have the ratio as it would apply to a development that comes in for multifamily and single family housing. But for, spots where maybe we want to have a little bit more flexibility because we have in downtown redevelopment or elsewhere, we don't want to have something that strictly limits what we're going to do from a ratio standpoint, but rather we want to look on just kind of intelligent design and intelligent planning. The last bullet point would just be redevelopment projects and senior housing projects are encouraged in the village. One thing that I would just say when it comes to senior housing is I have seen communities that have these different types of policies in place exempt senior housing from any type of ratio they have, because there's just this belief that there's going to be a lot more need for senior housing as we move forward, and they want to encourage that. But I just want to raise those as alternatives because I do believe that we should get rid of the ordinance. I think for all of the reasons that we've talked about tonight, it's created confusion as we've sought to have rezoning. And quite frankly, it's not necessary. If if the plan commission and the village board ultimately decide that they want to have a ratio or some form of a ratio that's going to apply to development, it's sufficient just to have it in the comprehensive plan. You don't need an ordinance to address it.
Okay, before I let you go, Jason, because I think you want to speak as well. Kevin, we're looking at something. I don't know if you're trying to get this into the village or not, your screen, but I'm looking at Ocean right now, and I don't know how we're going to get that into the village at this point.
Okay, sorry.
So, all right, Jason, go ahead.
There.
I think Brian covered most of what I was going to say. I think, from the confusion standpoint, I think staff has over the years kind of settled on a consistent interpretation of the ordinance, and so that's not a huge deal. I think more fundamentally, there just isn't a strong, compelling reason to have it to begin with. And to say that it's working, I guess would raise the question, working to do what exactly? And I don't think there's a compelling argument to have the ordinance to begin with.
Okay, can you guys take that off the screen again and put us all back on? Thank you. So, Brian, do you have any other comments? I mean, I have a few, but if you have some more, I don't want to cut you off.
No, it's okay. I think what I took away from that is it's the rezoning flexibility is the big thing with having it tucked into the ordinance. Get out of the ordinance, it makes it a little bit easier to address, deal with, manage rezoning requests down the road. And then we still sort of maintain the ability within the comp plan to sort of live within these ratios if that's the path forward that we want to take. So I think that was my takeaway. If I'm way off,
I'd agree with that.
let me know.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right on with that, Brian. And
okay.
The interesting thing, and I don't know why Brad Zeman, is Brad still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. So I think Brad might have been the only one on the plan commission when we redid our comp plan this last time. Is that accurate? Were any of the rest of you?
Yes, that is correct.
So when we went through this section of it, it was very much, we didn't really have any issues going on within our housing and our things. And we just kind of said, we don't need to change this. Let's just let it be. We're doing fine here.
That was 18 months ago.
Yeah, and to your point, Brian, that's kind of what our attitude was. Well, it's working. We seem to be fine here. What we found out, though, in the last 18 months is it's not necessarily working for all types of housing within our community. And it's not sending the greatest of messages out there with what's being built as a result of it. And then on top of it, your comment or Brian's comments, Brian Kleinmeier's comments and Jason's, this gives us more flexibility to allow for different things that are kind of right now stuck and they can't move forward. We went through a housing study, a housing task force. We've gone through our CDA. All have looked at this issue. And I think it's pretty clear from both of those bodies that this is something that just doesn't really apply to us anymore. And that's visual. Some people would maybe comment and think, well, yeah, you're right. Waunakee is a great place to live. People want to be here. We have it great right now. But we're the only ones that have that ratio. Is that what's causing that? I don't think so. I don't think that's what's causing it. I don't think we're going to see a big change with what we have for housing here in the first place. So I'm in favor of changing or throwing out, tossing the ordinance. And then Brad, what are you doing there? He's got this chuckle on his face. But I'm in favor of taking the ordinance away and looking at our comprehensive plan and using our comprehensive plan that we have control within that for what we're doing. So that's my take on this right now. So Kevin, we don't need to make a motion of any sort, or do we at this point tonight? Because you're saying we're kind of giving staff recommendation on what we want to do, correct?
May I defer to Brian? We're looking for clear direction from the Plan Commission to really direct us to move forward with the formal process. And with that formal process, there'll be change in the zoning code, and there'll be some changes to the comprehensive plan. And that's really where I think we can really dive into the changes in the comp plan. I think there seems to be consensus at the Planning Commission for doing away with the ordinance, but I didn't sense a full, I don't think everybody's completely on board with not having a ratio in there as some goals in the comprehensive plan. I think we can let the process play out, and we can make changes, to that comp plan as we go through that.
So one of the things that might be helpful then, Brian, if you can lay out the exact formal process of how this is going to go.
Sure. So when we change our zoning ordinance, it comes back to the Plan Commission. Our practice is typically to hold a public hearing before the Plan Commission for the Plan Commission to make a recommendation to the village board on the zoning ordinance change. And then it would go to the village board, and the village board would also hold a public hearing. In this particular instance, because of the language that's in the comp plan that I said before, where it says maintain regulations on the ratio, we really need to kind of have these move on parallel tracks. Now that would work out pretty well, because any recommendation on a comp plan change would have to first go to the Plan Commission. We'd have a public hearing before the Plan Commission, and then that would go to the village board, and we'd have a public hearing before the village board. So there's going to be a lot of public input here. I guess, I mean, it would be nice to have a little bit of guidance from the Plan Commission on, what to do. I haven't heard a lot of opposition to getting rid of the ordinance. I think what I have heard is a little bit of hesitancy to do away with the ratio altogether, and we've heard kind of people talking about goals and guidelines potentially in the comprehensive plan. And so one of the things that we could do is we could come back to the Plan Commission with, essentially alternatives. One alternative is the one that's in the email that's part of your packet that would modify the comp plan so that there's no reference to a ratio at all. But when we bring this back to you, if you're more comfortable, we can have alternatives, and that can be one of the alternatives. And then we can also have, bullet points, similar to what, or similar to what I said before. It wouldn't have to be identical, but I think if the Plan Commission's thought process here is, yeah, okay, we're okay with getting rid of the ordinance, we want to have further discussion on the changes to the comp plan, that's where I think it's up to staff to kind of bring back those alternatives. And the two alternatives I've heard so far are potentially the language that's in your packet right now, or, you'd like to see some language that would allow for maybe some type of ratio to be inserted into the comp plan.
Well, speaking for myself, which is all I really can do, I would say that I would like those bullet points that Brian, you addressed before. I think I would be more comfortable with those being in there than what's been laid out in front. So that's my opinion on this right now. I like the 66. I think it was 66. What did you say? 66, 63. I can't remember.
So, yeah.
Whatever that ratio was, I was good with it. 2/3, 1/3, whatever that is. 66, 33, 34, whatever that is, in there. So I'm inclined for that. That's my opinion. Brian Wallace.
I still struggle a little bit with this, of the reasoning for this, but I would say that if we're going to have some information in the comp plan to provide guidance for us and any future members of the village staff or the Plan Commission or the village board years from now, we need to make sure that we've got some specifics in there. And so some sort of ratio as a guideline, both for not only a particular development, but as a village-wide ratio. So we're constantly monitoring that, so that's not a free-for-all to get to, we can have development, we could have developments that are saying, hey, 74 or 70-30 or whatever the number might be. But if it's a free-for-all for individual multifamily housing developments, and all of a sudden we're at 60-40 or 55-45, then we got some challenges. So I'd like to see that tightened up a little bit so we know where we're at. And again, looking back at some of these other municipalities, especially when I look at the suburban Dane County municipalities, they all have some sort of goal in there, and that's pushing 65 to 70%.
I agree. Okay, Brian Malich.
There we go. Yeah, I think I'm okay with the ordinance side of it going away. I'm not comfortable getting rid of a ratio. I mean, anecdotally, I've been kind of picking some brains casually, just to see what some public impressions are. Interesting mix of how many people actually even are aware of sort of this 75-25 thing out there, and then of those that are aware of it. Nobody really knows how it's implemented, obviously. But I think there's a general like to keep sort of a higher ratio of single family home ownership versus rental. And I guess I don't know that I've got a reason to disagree with that. So I kind of like the 75-25 mix, and I'd like to see something like that coming back in the comp plan. It doesn't need to be a hard, if we've got a project that's going to, set the numbers to 74.5% versus 75, I don't really want that to kill a project. So some leeway, in terms of it being, generally a guideline to hit the number, 75 to 70, whatever it is, with the ability to have some flex around that.
Okay. Phil?
I agree with the flexible part of that. I'm not sure if what I'm saying is technically correct, but it seems that there's a lot of younger people that don't want to lock themselves into ownership. So we're going to seems like we're going to need more rental properties so they can early in life achieve their job goals and then decide to move on and go into ownership. So I think it's just a percentage game that we have to play for a while.
Thank you. Brad Zeman?
And I'll go back on Brian and Phil's comments as well. We've been talked about as a community or a village in Dane County for a while. And we've been trying to protect the school district and how many people we have in enrollment and what's happening here. We've been very strict. As you recall, the Dane County Housing Authority came in and really gave us a hard time about our percentages. And I'd like to see us become flexible with that and understand if we need to vary that percentage point by a point or two according to a project and our growth patterns within the village. I think it would be very applicable for us here in Waunakee.
Thanks, Brad. Chris Thomas?
I agree with trying to increase our flexibility by removing the ordinance or at least drastically changing the language in the ordinance. But along those same lines, I would like to, for trying to increase flexibility, I'd like to keep that in the comp plan as well. So I don't know if I necessarily want to restrict, the ratio in the comp plan, or if we can have some sort of wiggle room in there to keep that flexibility that we're trying to earn by removing that ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Kristen?
Yeah, I like flexibility too. I'd like to see some more types of housing developed in the village. So I feel like this is a good step to move.
Okay. Any other comments from any of you before I ask Brian and Kevin if they have good direction? Brian Malich.
Sorry, I don't think I really hit or clarified too when I was looking at the different options there in terms of, how this 75-25 or whatever it is implemented. I guess to me, it makes more sense to be a kind of a village-wide approach versus like any particular project. And I think there were some earlier discussions kind of in agreement with that approach. I just wanted to kind of highlight that.
Okay. Any other? All right, Kevin and Brian, do you guys have enough to work with there that what we've kind of said, or do we need a motion to be made?
I think I've heard it, and I'm just going to share my screen one more time. And
we can't get an ocean here,
I'll take the ocean out. So
okay.
This is really what Brian walked you through. So I think as we move forward, we'll start the process of removing the changes in the ordinances, and then we'll start the process of the comp plan with these general concepts. So we're leaving this a ratio in there of 66-33, but then there's some flexibility. in order to do that. And just note here that you know, that multifamily is, you know, that includes duplexes. So I think that's what I've heard, you know, consensus from the Plan Commission. So if that's the case, I think Brian and I have our marching orders.
Where did the 66 come from?
That's just an idea. It's not, it's just a draft. Yeah, it's not, you're not tied to that in any way, shape, or form.
Say, Kevin, what is our
Okay.
current single family to, you said our single family to multifamily right now was like 74 to 26 plus or minus. What is the number of single family homes, or what would be considered single family homes?
Brian, I don't know what that is off the top of my head. I used to have a spreadsheet that it'd take me, I could find it, I just don't, it's gonna take me a couple minutes.
No, that's fine. I guess if, when this comes back to us, that would be good information to have to understand how, you know, based at say 74 and 26% current ratio, you know, and whatever that new target might be or that guideline might be, how that impacts, you know, the number of multifamily versus single family that could potentially come into the area before we hit something like that.
Okay, so I think we're good. I don't want to be nitpicky, but I would actually be probably more comfortable with 70-30 versus the 66, but giving the flexibility with the 70. So if we need to go to 69.5 or something like that, or 69, because if we start with flexibility at 66, all of a sudden we're down at 65, 64, 60. I think 70 would be a good spot. That's my opinion. If you agree with me, please raise your hand. If you don't raise your hand. Okay, I only see one hand. Oh, Dan, I see. Okay, so I'm kind of getting with Brian and Chris have this.
I like the high
Okay.
number. Flexible off 75.
Well, I think that, and I think again, Chris, that's, you know, really looking at it as more of a guideline and understanding that there may be some movement on that number.
Okay. So I think 66 is going to be low, is what I'm hearing from a lot of people. So I was trying to get more central in the 75 by going to 70, but somewhere between 70 and 75 is where it sounds like we're going to fall. So I think that's good. I think that's enough for you guys. Yes, Brian?
I think we'll start with 70 and understand you guys can make changes as you move forward.
Correct. We're going to get a lot of public opinion on this as well as we go through this right now. So, okay. Sound good? All right, moving on. Next one, we have discussion and action on the site plan approval for the Northridge Park Shelter, 313 Northridge Drive.
Okay, I think this is pretty straightforward. Our Parks Committee is recommended approval, has a couple of board members on it. We're required by ordinance to have the Plan Commission review and approve this. I can tell you that, you know, Kent Strauss was actually the design engineer on the civil portion of it. And I think the architects may be on if you have questions, but I know that some of you probably are more familiar with this, Chris and others who are on the Parks Committee. But I don't see any reason to have much discussion other than it looks like a nice looking building, and I know it fits within their budget now.
Phil, you're the Parks Chair, I believe. Yes?
Yes, we looked at a lot of plans. This one fits in. It doesn't cause any stormwater problems in the area. It's easy for our staff to maintain. It's got clean roof lines and it fits in with the neighborhood very nicely.
And I'll second that. So questions for everybody. Brian Wallace, any questions?
I did not have any questions, although I didn't necessarily see a site plan as far as location, but not a huge issue.
Yeah, sorry, that didn't make it into the packet. We can have, it's up right now. We had it available. Sorry, it wasn't in the packet, but there it is.
All right, thank you, Kevin.
So Brian, I'll come back to you if you have any questions about the site plan. Brian Malich?
No, I don't think I had any questions other than, yeah, the same thing. I was curious, site orientation, not that it, you know, swayed anything one way or the other. So are the restrooms on the sort of the northeast facing side and then open to the south?
I got somebody on. I got one of the architects raise his hand. Let's see if I can get him in here.
Oh.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jacob.
Hi, this is Jacob Himmelman from R.L. Everly Architects. Yeah, you're correct. So the picnic area is what faces the parking lot, and then the restrooms are towards the back of the building. So if you went to the next slide or the floor plan, I think you'd be able to see that a little bit clearer. So. Up just a little bit more. One more plan up there. That's the ceiling, but you can see. So there's the restrooms are towards the back of the building.
Okay, Chris Thomas.
Just want to confirm, are the bathrooms handicap accessible?
Yes, they are definitely handicap accessible.
And then one more
Two
question.
Toilets.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, there's 2 toilets in the women's room, and then one is accessible and one is a standard. And then in the men's, it's accessible toilet and then a urinal in the bathroom.
And then one more question, and this is more COVID related times we're living in now. Are there going to be any like hand sanitizers or anything like that available?
That has not been discussed with the team. So certainly I can talk to Sue about that with her team as we kind of finalize the documents and see what appropriate measures they would like to take.
So I would just point out, I saw that Bill Frederickson was on the call. Bill, do you want to pull Bill in and let him know or let him share what's been going on with that from a hand washing perspective?
I did. Bill, you should be able to talk.
Okay. Yeah. No. We now have installed soap in all the bathrooms. We figured to use soap in that, and then we now go through and disinfect everything as we move forward. But the soap is also can be used as a hand sanitizer.
Okay. Is that all of our park shelters right now, Bill?
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that's a lot of work for your staff and department to be taken care of, so I appreciate you guys doing that. This will be no exception to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris Thomas, any other comments?
That's all I had. Thank you.
Kristen Runge?
I'll echo Chris on hand washing stations. I was recently up at Door County, and a couple of places have installed exterior sinks next to bubblers so that you can actually wash your hands without going into a bathroom. If we're going to be dealing with this virus for a lot longer and that's not a significant cost increase, maybe that's something we should start considering. I'm not on the Parks Commission, so that comes completely out of the blue, but just a thought.
Okay. Brad Zeman? Brad Zeman? Did we lose Brad? We must have lost Brad. I don't see him anymore either. Okay. Yeah, I'm echoing everybody. I mean, I think the shelter worked. The first one that came through was quite a bit more expensive than this one, and basically cost prohibitive in a big way. This one fits more into it. So, Phil, do you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, motion by Brian Wallace. Do we have a second? Phil, I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you.
Second.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Do we, roll call vote, please, Tracy?
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Phil Willems,
Yes.
Brian Malish,
Yes.
Chris Thomas,
Yes.
Brian Wallace,
Yes.
and Brad Zeman. I think we lost Brad. Motion carried.
Okay, thank you. Next one we have is discussion action on amending section 133.995 regarding parking requirements.
So this is Yeah, this has been on our list, our to-do list in terms of updating our parking ordinances, and those who've been on the Plan Commission for a number of years now realize that it's been common practice for us to grant exceptions to our parking standards, which is allowed. But rather than always grant these exceptions, we thought it'd be appropriate to update our parking standards. And really our baseline, what we've been using in the past for these exceptions is really similar to other communities our size, but really zoning in on what the city of Middleton would spent amount of effort updating their parking standards. So if we want to go through just a couple of different bullet points with you, and if we get consensus on these bullet points, we'll put something in draft form for you then to authorize us to move forward with the process of updating the ordinance. And so, Tracy, if you could bring up Jason's memo. So there's, the 5 really concepts that we want to get buy-in from the Planning Commission, and the parking calculation. There's some confusion in the way we count parking stalls for compared to some of our peers. We want to make sure that our parking calculations are really in standard, are really consistent with what the standards are for in 2020, and not what they were when this was drafted like in the 90s. So our parking calculations would be really mirror what's been done in our neighboring communities. Like I said, in Middleton, multifamily, it's been almost a standard that we've provided to exceptions, and we think it's more important to have the parking standard be based on the number of bedrooms. So it's really the number of people that are living there, and setting a standard that way, rather than just a standard or 2 parking stalls forever for even a single thing, or even a 1-bedroom. It would be like 2 parking stalls required for a 2-bedroom, and really 1 parking stall for a 1-bedroom. With that, so what we want to do is just update that and match in with our peers. The second one is for multifamily at the step level, and we'd like to see if you agree, is that there should be at least 1 covered or enclosed parking unit for every unit. So if it's a 2-bedroom, at least one of them, the stalls have to be either enclosed or in a covered parking spot. Third point is that we don't want to put in more parking than we think is necessary. So we wanted to see if you're okay with us setting a limit and saying, it's 110 or 120% of the standard, so that we don't we don't have too much parking going forward. Generally speaking, these applicants that put these projects together have a better understanding of their parking needs than our zoning code. But we don't want to, I think we worked through this with the Hy-Vee review. They were over substantially what was required in parking, and so then rather than have a sea of asphalt, we don't, that they can use for multi-staging reasons, I think is what Hy-Vee told us, is that we do have a limit. And granted, we're trying to avoid exceptions, but it doesn't always give you, it always gives you at least the ability to grant exceptions if you need it. There's a standard in our parking ordinance that requires a 25-foot setback from any commercial from a commercial parking lot to a residential. It's been in our ordinance, and unless there was an exception granted, that all parking lots had to be 25 feet set back, from any of the residential properties. And then the last one was curb requirements, and this is something we haven't required in the past, and I'd say we probably only get it, about half the time. But do we want to, as a standard, require curbs around the parking lot, so that we really have a really defined area where these parking lots are? So that's the 5 general points we want to make to the changes. If there's questions, we can talk through those. If there's buy-in on those 5 changes, we would write more specific languages to the zoning code. Really get your authorization then at next month to start the public process on what those changes would be. So with that, Chris, I would open it up to questions unless Jason wanted to add on to anything that I presented.
The only thing I
Let
would,
Jason go first.
thank you. The only thing I would add is that I think that I know that as we go through, there's going to be some odds and ends stuff that I would categorize as housekeeping that we would probably take care of too. And obviously we would point those out to you, but I think there'll be a few more things that we would look to change besides these 5 issues. But these are the 5 that jumped out as the ones we thought you'd be most interested in.
Okay, so Kevin, I just want one point of clarification. For the last one, the curb requirement, your comment was that we require this, but only get it about half the time.
Sorry, we do not require it, but we get it about half the time.
Okay, so, okay. That was like, well, if we require it and we're going to get it half the time, I mean, we're pretty
No, my
flexible here,
apologies.
obviously.
Yeah.
With that one. I guess my take on this parking wise is, you brought up Middleton, and I look at downtown Middleton and I see cars parked every direction, everywhere. They don't have enough parking in that zone. If I go into other areas of Middleton, I don't see that being a problem, where they have plenty of additional parking. So is it unusual to have different rules and regulations in a downtown versus outside the downtown? Is my first question. From a requirement standpoint.
Jason can probably answer that better. I would just say, like in our downtown, a number of these businesses, commercial businesses, were in place before we had parking standards. And so they really relied on the street parking to be their parking lots. And so if you go to the outskirts of, and I think that's similar in Middleton as well, that in their more greenfield developments, there's sufficient parking because they're meeting their parking standards. But in the downtown,
so maybe I'll just say, I mean, and I look at their development that they've done just off the Beltline there in their downtown area. It feels like they shoehorned everything in as tight as they could possibly make it, and there's vastly and not enough parking in that area. And so that's why I'm asking the question.
So I would add to that I would reiterate what Kevin said, which is that in many cases, these downtowns were developed before zoning existed, so there weren't parking standards. And even today, many communities, and I actually don't know for certain with Middleton, but I suspect this is the case, that there is a downtown zoning district that still doesn't require any off-street on-site parking. And the rationale for continuing to operate that way is that if you start requiring on-site parking, you're going to get a very different outcome that isn't consistent with the character of the downtown that you have right now. And so the solution tends to be finding spaces for shared private parking or public parking, some of which Waunakee is doing right now, and finding ways to be flexible and to be creative, so that you have the form that you want, and so that you can make the most of what is often the most valuable land in the community, in the downtown area, by having parking that can serve many different uses and is therefore used more efficiently, using that land more efficiently. So it can be a headache, but it's also a sign of, having to look a little bit for parking is usually a sign of a vibrant downtown too.
So then I guess maybe I'm just coming at it wrong way, and I'm sure I'll be easily convinced, maybe not. But I think of our parks, and it seems to me that we continuously add parking into our parks. We didn't have enough to start with, and we continuously grow those parking lots. Our business parks, as we go through, I look at our existing businesses out there, and many of them are out in the streets parking because they've had overflow out of their parking. So I'm just trying to come to grips with that. If we're gonna change those minimums or make it that we're not putting in, what is that gonna mean? I'm struggling with reducing any requirements we have with parking, I guess is what I'm saying.
I would say our main focus is on the multifamily for reducing. On the commercial, it would be to revise it so that it is more clear, because right now it says the metric is based on the amount of like customer access, customer usable space, omitting service spaces within buildings, and we often don't know that, or we're guessing. And so it's been difficult to administer. So in that case, we would be looking to just change how it's calculated. And then generally just looking over the rest of them to check to see if there's anything that maybe we could also kind of make it easier to administer. I don't know if there's any that jump out that we think are necessarily either under or over parked, but figured that once we got into the conversation, we would get some feedback to confirm that in other districts, everything or other categories, things are good or not.
Okay, I think I made where I stand. So Kristen, I'm gonna let you go next.
This all seems sensible to me. No questions.
Okay, Chris Thomas?
Same as Kristen. I have no additional comments or questions.
Ryan Wallace?
I'm open for the review and wait for the information to come forward.
Brian Malich?
Maybe a couple of quick ones. The parking minimum, I think that was specifically where maybe you mentioned the Hy-Vee example. I wanted to clarify, was Hy-Vee actually lobbying to have more asphalt in front of their building than? Okay, all right. I saw the head nod. So then the next one on the commercial setback for residential uses, the 25 feet. Do you have like an example of that? I'm trying to picture where that might come into play, where it's maybe been a problem in the past, or I'm trying to picture a site, can zoom in and think about what that means to keep it or lose it.
The best one I can think of, and we didn't catch it the first time through, was when Walgreens was redeveloped from the O'Malley restaurant into a Walgreens. There was a parking lot there, but then when we redid the design of the site plan, that parking lot and driveway is within 25 feet of a residential property. So I generally like the 25-foot setback, and I don't know if Jason agrees with that, but I think it gives some good separation from commercial properties to residential.
I'll jump in too. I generally like it as well, but we have been looking at a potential project that has a commercial site next to an R5 multi-story multi-unit apartment building, where they would like to put parking closer than 25 feet to that building. And in that case, it seems appropriate, and maybe we add some nuance that makes a distinction between higher and lower density districts, where the setback would be less for the higher density, next to higher density residential.
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, the proposed, it'll be on our plan commission next month. The Carl's Dentistry is looking at redeveloping their site and buying the parcel next door and doing a really nice redevelopment project. And to the side yard of that project, there's a 3-story plus multifamily building. And the way the strict interpretation is that the parking lot needs to be set back 25 feet from the residential. And I think what Jason is saying is it is residential, but it's a large, massive, structure that the 25 feet probably shouldn't apply there.
Okay, Phil?
Thank you. I like all of this. I'd like to defend not having curbs everywhere. We're a little bit, on our businesses, we're a little bit more than 50% because it gives us a good looking lot. But in some areas, we need the opportunity to push snow about 7 days a year. So I defend the right for us to pick a few spots to where we can not have to raise the blade and lose all of our momentum to get rid of that snow.
Okay, so I'm gathering for most everybody that we should give direction to the staff to look at making these draft orders for changes. Is that accurate? Across the board there? It doesn't look like we need a motion. Is that correct, Kevin?
Correct. No motion needed.
So a show of hands if you're good with directing staff to move forward with this. Okay, I see your directions are right there in full. So, okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, our last item, well, before joint, is discussion and action on guidance to village staff on possible amendments to the comprehensive plan regarding affordable housing. Kevin?
So we want to take a step back from the last planning commission meeting where we started talking about, particular language in the comprehensive plan regarding affordable housing. And we wanted to see if there's consensus in terms of moving forward with these concepts. So with that, Jason, can you walk them through what the proposed concepts are?
Sure. The memo I provided on this is pretty brief, making reference again to the fact that the CDA has been talking about this. I would say that there is language in the comp plan already that talks about a variety of housing types, about having, addressing housing affordability, but there isn't a whole lot of detail. And so the broad themes, the changes to be made, one would be to clarify what is meant by affordable housing. We know from our discussions with the CDA that even, after multiple meetings of talking about it, there's still been some kind of disagreement or repeated questions about what is really meant. So having some kind of commonly agreed upon language that we can all look to say, this is what we mean when we say affordable housing. And then the second part is to add kind of a menu of things that the village would consider for policies or programs to seek a variety of housing, of affordable housing types. And so the CDA has been talking about some of those a bit. And if put into the comp plan, the intent would not be to instantly authorize all of them, but rather to set up kind of an initial menu of things that the village has indicated is willing to consider, with the expectation that with each policy or with each funding program or whatever it would be, that one at a time, those things would come forward through the Plan Commission, through Council to be individually approved once there are details on how the policy reads or how the funding program works or whatever it might be. So those are the two items that, based on conversations with the CDA, staff recommends we would like to get from you some guidance as to whether you generally support these in an effort to add some detail on housing affordability to the comp plan.
And I'm going to go right to Kristen on this one for her comments. Since this is her area of expertise, it makes sense for her to comment first, I think.
Come on. I like to go last on this. So yeah, so affordable is such an ambiguous term, right? Affordable for whom? I tend to think of this when I look at a community as who is able to afford to be in that community and who is missing from that community. So if a community is increasing its incomes and it looks significantly different than it did 30, 40 years, one generation prior, is that an intended thing? Is that a planned thing? Or are we starting to miss younger people who have regular jobs as opposed to high-end professional jobs? So how is that for an ambiguous answer to an ambiguous term? And I probably just confused the issue a little bit more.
I don't think you confused the issue. I think that this is something that, again, the Housing Task Force battled with, CDA has battled with, trying to come up with that elusive term of affordable housing. Yeah. And, there's different things and strategies that we discussed at our meeting of things that we can do or could do or could choose to do, I guess is the right word, including, we could use our TIFs to get some offset funding to help with affordable housing at the ends of those TIFs by extending them for a year and using proceeds towards affordable housing. That's just one example that I'm just throwing out there. And I think what's being recommended here is that we're looking at those kinds of things, not saying that we are going to do those things, but we could use those things. Is that fair to say, Jason?
Yes.
So we're just really listing those. Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I say, let me add one thing to that. A lot of the times we discuss this, what is the area median income? And for a particular community or the county in which that community is situated. And can people afford that make, say, 80 to 100% of area median income? Are there a sufficient number of homes that are affordable? In Waunakee, that's a little bit over $105,000 right now. So one way is like identifying what is your missing middle or your middle income households. In Waunakee, that would be 80,000 to 120,000. And that's 80 to 120%. What is 60 to 80% of area median income? Really easy math in Waunakee right now. It's about 60,000 to 80,000. Is there a sufficient number of housing available if somebody in that income category comes in? So that's maybe a little bit more concrete way of describing what is affordable and who can afford to move into a community in terms of dollar amounts.
Phil, any comments?
If I look confused, I am.
Okay. So I think what if I can recap, Kristen, if I say something inappropriate or wrong, say that's not the right what I meant. She's saying that the average person here looking at in Waunakee, $60,000 to $80,000 gets them. We're vastly under. We don't have a lot of housing for that group right now. Okay. 105,000 being our average, it's easy to come up with those numbers. She's just using 100,000 for that number. So I look at it saying, all right, if you have a household of two working adults in there, to get to $100,000, that means you have two people making roughly $25 an hour. That gets to that point. And that can be a challenge for a lot of our young folks coming and trying again. So that's the area that we're missing right now, are those kids that are coming out of college, kids that are going into trades. If they have debt with them, going with that, they're carrying all those different things once they come out. So that's what we're trying to figure out, is how we can help that group, to pull that group into our community. Because right now it's short of inheritance and or parents helping them to get in, it's going to be a real significant challenge. So what we're doing really with this is looking at different ways to put it into our comprehensive plan. To define that, what are some potential solutions that we have, avenues for us to pull that we could help. That's really ultimately what we'll be looking at doing here. Go ahead, Jason.
I just want to add, because I didn't touch on it earlier, but to explain why we're talking about amending the comp plan here, you don't need to have this language in your comp plan to come up with, to decide to extend a TID, for example, and to come up with a program that would then use those funds to support certain types of projects. The reason that staff is encouraging the injection of some of this into the comp plan is to have some conversation about it, and then to document that there has been conversation about it, so that each time something comes forward, especially if it includes some element of public funding in support of affordable housing, we expect questions. Well, why are we doing this, and why is it appropriate to be doing this? And it would be helpful to have that record of public conversation and public decision in the comp plan to support it.
Ryan Wallace?
I do not have any questions at this time.
How about any comments?
I'm going to withhold.
Okay, Chris Thomas?
Can you clarify where that 105,000 is coming from? That's the average income right now for
No.
Median income.
Median.
Average income is higher. So median income, 50% of the families or 50% of the households, not families, 50% of the households in Waunakee make above, 50% make below. And I'm not looking at the census data where that's taken from. It's from the American Community Survey. So it might be like 108. It's slightly under 110. And if you give me a few seconds, I'll actually pull that up on my computer and report back.
Do we know what the average income is for someone who works in Waunakee?
It's somebody that works here.
Right.
So we detailed that in the housing task force. It's lower than the median income of somebody that lives here. So if you compare median to median, if you work in Waunakee, generally speaking, you make less than if you live here and work elsewhere. And that's just part of the churn and who we're attracting as residents. I can look that up as well too.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's where I lean is for trying to get affordable housing in Waunakee. I think I'd want it to be affordable for those that are working in Waunakee. So I would want to do it based off of some percentage of the income that someone earns while working in our community.
Thanks, Chris. Brian Malich?
Well, I guess I kind of maybe want to push a little bit of the questioning from the other direction. I'm looking at the line item in the memo here. It just says staff believes that comp plan is an appropriate vehicle for the Plan Commission and Village Board to affirm that efforts toward affordable housing should be pursued. And so I guess I maybe want to throw the question out there: should they be pursued by the Village Board, by the Plan Commission? So I guess I'm looking at memo from last month with a bunch of suggested village policies. I mean, they're all things that are going to require, I'm assuming, some significant public funding coming into the mix. And so is there an opportunity to maybe discuss the appropriateness of, should we be doing this? Where, when is that conversation to occur?
Jason, any comments to that?
I would say that is the main thrust of this agenda item. Do you want to affirm that this is something the village should be pursuing? If you do, we'll come back with suggestions for how, more details on what that language looks like. But that's kind of the fundamental question: is what do you think of the work of the task force, the housing task force that was completed its work last year, and is there a role in this community in the same way that many other communities are starting to realize no one else is going to step up to the plate other than the local community?
Okay.
Okay.
Brian, all you did was squirm after that answer. So you didn't really, that's what I noticed, was a lot of squirming and moving after it. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, the work that has been done, the information has been provided is good. It's good to know. I struggle on the next steps, on the what now, on the appropriateness of, if I go back to these, some of these suggested village, and I don't know if this shows up here, but it's a white paper, of course. Looking back at the memo from last month, and I've got these, 1.2 through 7 suggested village policies. 1.2 starts talking about TIF, and holy mackerel, is that one that I would love to go out to the public and start talking about right now. It's a little sarcasm there. It's not. Some of them I've got just, some homework to do. There's a lot of words about encourage. Well, what does that mean for us to encourage a developer to do something? Look at redevelopment sites that looks like it's starting to talk about the village getting into the real estate game. And do we start buying properties and driving our own affordable housing developments. And I guess once I hit that point, I'm really starting to hit in the no. I don't think it's an appropriate action for us to be taking. So where, I guess I'm trying to find in my mind, where is sort of that happy medium between encouraging and what does that look like versus, actively spending public dollars on an effort. So yeah, I guess I'm squirming because I'm trying to figure out where I am in that range or that spectrum, and how to actually address this.
I think those are all valid questions what you're asking right now. Any other comments from folks based on Brian's comments?
Well, that's, I think Brian said it well, and that's where I'm struggling with this as well, is if we're going to start dedicating public dollars, are we talking about, up to subsidized housing, or what, at what lengths are we going to go to, in essence, affect the market? When houses went in 20 years, or when lots went in 20 years ago, they may not have meant to be what they are today, but that's what the market is driven. And I know that Viridian's development is going to try to create some level of affordability, but they're limiting that to a certain amount as well, a certain percentage. And how do we, short of subsidizing a bunch of stuff, how do we create that when the market is really going to drive it?
Kristen, you want to address that?
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
so.
Because so we signaled, we didn't create, the demand is already here for housing that costs less than what we're doing. And when I say the demand is here, within our village, there are people who would choose to live in a less expensive house perhaps than they live in, or choose to move up from a less expensive house to something more than what they have, but significantly less than what the market is providing right now. So there is, when we talk about market demand, there is market demand in all price ranges in our income, including those that are what we might consider at the more affordable range. But one of the successes of the Housing Task Force, in my opinion, is that by putting that together, doing that study, really articulating what we saw as a need, or what the task force saw as a need in the community, is what provided the rationale for Viridian to come in with a marketplace solution. And if you go back and you watch those videos, and some of you were in the presentation, it was a year ago this month, right? Slightly before I was on the board, I stood up and I gave the presentation to the Plan Commission and to the village board, and then Viridian literally stood up afterwards, held up the report and said, this is the reason we're coming here. So that was a complete market-based solution to an issue of affordability within certain price ranges. Fast forward to October of last year, and Cohen Esri comes in and does the same thing, holds the report up and says, we understand that you see a need as a community, and we think we have a solution to it. So neither of those projects have required public investment dollars outside of statewide available WIDA financing, which Cohen Esri did take advantage of that. So that didn't come within the village. So how do we get that without putting tax dollars into it, is by saying that we want a stake in this type of housing, by showing that there's a need, by helping developers identify how they can come and work with us as a community within our parameters and our values. So we're getting asked from my extension life, my UW extension life, we're getting asked to repeat those projects in other communities because it worked so well here. And other communities don't, like we don't, want to spend the tax dollars to do something when they know they can probably find a free market partner to help them with that. So does that answer your question, Chris? And
it does, Kristen.
When you're ready.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. It does.
Yeah.
But my point, I guess, with that, and Viridian's going to offer an opportunity here with some what we deem market affordable housing. But what's that? What are those houses? When the first time buyer goes in there and then they turn around and they want to move up, what's the price of that house now in this market? And that's my point, is we can with the partners that are there, they can create these initially, but is it going to stabilize and stay at that, or is it going to, price itself out of the market then, or price itself out of affordability?
Yeah, and that's a tricky question, right? Because I mean, there are mechanisms for doing that. We haven't done that as a community. If you go into Madison and you look at some of the housing cooperatives or some of the housing trusts, they do limit the amount that you can profit year over year on a house, how much they'll allow the house to increase for. So that is one way of doing it. I personally tend to think that even a family that's buying a house that's initially affordable has a right to profit from that investment over the long term. So the solution, and I've said this in more than one community, the solution to today's housing shortage would be go back to the 1950s and build a lot more 2 and small 3-bedroom ranch homes, because those are flying off the market right now. So when we're building homes that are smaller in size than some of the larger, beautiful homes that we have in our community, but smaller in size on smaller lots that are more affordable to build, more affordable to maintain, over the long term, those will appreciate, but appreciating 2% on a $250,000 house versus 2% a year on a $500,000 house will still keep that house affordable over the long term, most likely. And when there's not, then we find ourselves what we're doing today, having these discussions about how do we increase the supply since we're starting to run short again.
No, I think that's good, and I appreciate that. The one thing I would say is that I would venture to guess that the appreciation on those more moderate priced homes would advance quicker than a more higher price, because they're more marketable to more people.
Yeah.
But I understand it. If that's the approach we want trying to make here, great. I just, I made the comment earlier about, do we want to get into subsidized housing? I don't know that we want to go there, but that's not my decision to make as a whole. But that's what I want to just get a better understanding of.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to yet. Let's see who else wants to come and play.
Sort of maybe follow up the discussion in the Heritage Hills example specifically. Does the CDA feel like the Viridian development, the Heritage Hills development is doing what they're looking for? Are they content with that? I thought I heard some rumblings that maybe a year ago it sounded like the price points would be a little bit lower than maybe what it sounds like now the price points are actually going to be, which doesn't shock me. But I guess I'm wondering now, would the CDA step back now today and say, yeah, the Viridian Heritage Hills, that's like what we have in mind and what we want to have happen?
I don't think Chris, I'll defer to you. I don't think we've asked, and they've only, the CDA is going to meet for its 3rd or 4th time this next week.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Something we can talk about.
Yeah.
I'd be really curious to hear their thoughts on where that one's landing, because in terms of what the village commitment to that. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure. I know there's some roads, some utility improvements that the village has sort of shared some costs on, but I think it's been limited to that, to my knowledge. Yeah.
Jason.
Yeah, I guess just with regard to Heritage Hills, my understanding of that project is that there is not, the village isn't putting money on the table that's addressing affordability, certainly. I think the cost sharing is related to kind of things that benefit more than just them. And though I would agree the CDA hasn't talked about it specifically, is that, does this satisfy our need? I think that if it plays out the way they pitched it, that the ownership housing or what's intended to be ownership housing in that development, there's a good chunk of it that is smaller lots, smaller units, kind of middle of the road scale on finish quality, meaning it's not bad stuff at all. I mean, they do, but they're not luxury builders, and they're trying to hit certain price points, and they're trying to do it market affordable, not subsidized affordable. And what I don't think I've heard, or maybe I missed it, but I don't know that there's anything that they're trying to hit a certain price point with their apartment buildings that are planned. And so I don't know that that part of that project is going to satisfy affordability interests at all. I don't recall seeing that they were trying to hit price points with that part of the project. So, and on that piece, I think even if they were, I think there would be interest in seeing projects, additional projects for rental housing that is affordable in the village.
So my comment on this is really what we're kind of a victim of right now is that people have come into our community, into our second, third, fourth, fifth streets, our core of our village, and those small homes that were affordable, they've come in and remodeled them and made them really nice homes for the most part, and now they're all quite a bit more expensive. So the amount of housing we have that's in that tier, which you would normally have, is just not there anymore, or very, very little of it. So, you know, I'm all with Brian that public assistance and such. Do we want to go down that road right off the bat? No, we want to have solutions that we can provide. And I think that's what we're trying to do right now, is figure out what that is and what those options are and lay those out. At least make it known that this is on the table. Not necessarily we're going to do it, but it's there and on the table. That's how I see this right now. And then we're going to have to make choices as developers come in and what they want to do. But we'll at least have it there. So,
You want those income numbers?
go ahead.
All right. So when we did the housing study, we used the 2017 census data. At that time, the median income 50% below, 50% above for households was 98,224. Excuse me, using the 2019 census, that number has increased to 106,321. So the median household, 50% of households in Waunakee make less than 106,321, 50% make above. When we look at the workforce, I don't have the current year data on that, but going by per worker, not per household, but per worker paycheck on a monthly basis, median worker working in Waunakee makes between $1,252 and $3,333. That's a huge range, but we just have it in bins on this. The median worker living in Waunakee makes more than $3,333, and that's the highest category we have. That's from that second number is from page 16 of the housing study. And I can provide updated numbers next month if you want on work in, live in differences.
Okay, so I think I'll close the discussion, or maybe I'm going to open it up to more with this statement. But we've seen our housing task force and the CDA really weigh in that this is an area that we need to address, and we have had community input as well to that process. I think all we're really going to be doing with this, and if we're going to do anything with the comprehensive plan, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if Brian is still with us. If we're going to do that, we're still going to get more input through public hearings to this. Is that correct?
Yes.
If we just go down this road. So really, we're just looking to go down the road and look and see what can we be doing here? What are the recommendations that have been made? And will it be appropriate for us to make decisions to change or add these things into our comprehensive plan? To this point, I do believe the CDA and the Housing Task Force both are in agreement that it's yes. And we are the natural next body to see that as we go through. So their recommendations are that we're going down this road. Kristen, would you agree with everything I stated there? Since you sit on those committees with me?
Yeah, I'd agree.
So really what we're looking at doing tonight is looking at potentially making some edits to that comprehensive plan, just like our other items on the agenda tonight, and seeing if we'd want to add those. And the public will be weighing in, and we'd be listening to them. I think that's a good thing for any of our commissions and committees to do, is to listen to the public and get their input on these topics, and then make an informed decision based on all the facts in front of us. So my direction would be for us to proceed and take this on with staff. Now, do I have the rest of you in support of that, or if you have different opinions, let's just go with that. So if somebody else has a different, or they would just say, let's not do this. I mean, those are really the two options on our table right now. We're not going to do this, or let's go down this road and see what we're going to find. Is that fair to say, Brian and Jason?
Yeah, I agree with that. And the only thing, and I echo what you said of essentially, if the Plan Commission says let's move forward, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're agreeing to anything. What you're effectively saying is let's move forward and get more input on these issues to help make the decisions.
Correct. So is everybody okay? So show of hands, who is okay with moving forward with this? Okay, so I have a 4 and Brian. I think Brian Malich, I think that was a half of a hand. I'm looking for Brian Wallace. I can't see him for some reason. There you are. Okay, hands again. Okay, so Brian Wallace, go ahead. I see everybody's got their hand up, so go ahead, Brian Wallace.
What was the question again? I must have kicked out here on the internet, so.
So basically we're looking at, are we gonna move this down the road to consider it? Or is it gonna be killed tonight? That we're just not gonna move it forward? Those are our two options.
Okay, and I guess the question that was kind of the question I had here, is there, the staff will prepare some edits or what that might look like from an affordable, from the definition of affordable housing or whatnot.
Yeah, correct. So what you missed, and I had Brian come on too. So basically we're going through the process just like our other thing where we're looking at going down, we're going to get public input. If we choose to make decision to change it, okay. If we don't, then it won't. But we still could make that decision, push it up to the village board, and the village board could still say no. So really we're just taking this down the road right now to consider all of our different options. Brian Kleinmeyer, since the green room is in effect, go ahead.
So, I mean, the only thing that I'd add to that is, we obviously had part of a discussion earlier tonight on the ordinance and the comp plan related to the housing ratio. That is essentially a step in front of all this other stuff. In other words, how we came back with information on that item, we would still need to do that on this item. So this is even a step behind the ordinance and the comp plan language on the housing ratio from a procedural standpoint.
Okay, so Kevin, go ahead.
I was just going to add that we don't have, we had a recommendation from the CDA on our other agenda item. We don't have a recommendation on these issues from the CDA.
Kristen, do you have any comments on that?
No, yeah.
So again, I think we're just taking this down the road. The CDA is going to be taking it as well. I mean, I think it's very appropriate for where we're living today and what we have in Waunakee. So again, I'm all in favor of taking it down the road and getting public input. Anybody against that? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I agree with you, Chris. Take it down the road. In the past, we've tried, I remember over in Arboretum, we tried smaller lots and people overbuilt on them and made them expensive, so it didn't work out. I think going down the road with us a little bit and having more and more input, maybe we can get the results we want out of both the developer and the buyers and the builders. But I think we also should look at what we as a village demand of the developers in some of these areas, because our park requirements are a little stiff. We got to have the good streets, we got to have all that, but maybe here and there we could weaken on some of the added things that we've been asking for. I don't know if, not too much, but a little bit to help them out.
Okay, so anybody else have any comments other than let's move this down the road and see where it takes us? Everybody good with that? Thumbs up? See them? Okay. Kevin, Brian, Jason, any other things that we need from you guys or for you guys? Nope, I'm getting all no's over there. All right, anything for joint plan or anything that we need to go over, Kevin?
Cancel.
Cancel. So that would be a no. Then we have one super big important one last motion. Who wants to make it?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Chris Thomas to adjourn. And nobody wants to
I'll
leave.
second.
Brian Malich wants to leave too. So there's a second. So Tracy, roll call vote, please.
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
Bill Willems,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Brian Malish,
Yes.
Brian Wallace,
Yes.
and Brad Zeman. We lost Brad.
Okay, everybody, thank you for tonight's meeting. Appreciate all your input and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.